Hey guys, and welcome to today's talk. We've got a wonderful guest with us today. We're going to be talking about the thing that drives every single one of us that is on the entrepreneurial journey, and that's freedom. Freedom is one of the core things that we all strive for, and in whatever form that takes for you. So we're going to be chatting to Sam about that today, and I can't wait to bring her on and start the conversation. So let's dive straight in. Hey, Sam, wonderful to see you.
Hi, Colin.
Hey, Sam, before we get started, whereabouts in the world are you today? Share with everybody.
Right now, I am in an apartment overlooking a rice field on the outer edges of Ubud, which is in Bali.
Wonderful. I love it. So Sam, today's talk, you talked about waiting for retirement. Don't wait for retirement before you find freedom and all of that. And I'm so excited to discuss this because it's something that really drives me personally on my journey about this sense of freedom and being in control, I guess, of your destiny, in this life. It's so critical. And so I'm excited I've got lots of questions, lots of things I'd love to talk about. But before we dive into that, do you want to just begin by giving us a little bit of background on your journey and what's led you to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So
Wonderful.
I suppose maybe about 5 years ago, I started thinking, I wanted to perhaps steer my life in a different direction. I had quite a heavy duty job as head of marketing for a large NHS healthcare organisation. And I was working a lot of hours and so on and so forth. But various things meant that I started exploring different ways of living. I looked at location independence. I looked at living from my laptop. I looked at, working from an RV in the middle of America from my laptop. I looked at all sorts of different ways of trying to live in a different sort of way. But I couldn't at that time really do anything about it. My daughter was in her late teenage years and she was about to go to university. So I needed to help her through that and sort of stay where I was. And she got into university, and on the second year of being in university, we discovered that my father had cancer. He became very, very sick. It's a pretty long story, so I won't go into huge amounts of detail, but just to say that it was a bit of a roller coaster ride for Dad, and it really made me reflect even more on why we are here, and whether or not, continuing to work within that sort of corporate environment was right for me personally. My father had a stem cell transplant and he was briefly better. I took the chance to take a sabbatical, and whilst I did that, I picked up some freelance work on the road. And at that time, I was traveling through South and Central America. But then my father sadly died, and it made me realize that I just couldn't go back to my job in the office. I had to have a new and exciting chapter to my life. By this stage, my daughter had left university, so I was a bit more free and able to do what I needed to do. And so I came home and I left my job, and then I went fully freelance as a marketing communications freelancer, basically like a consultant. And I came over to Bali in October, carried on with freelancing with the clients I already had and picked up a few others. And I also set up a website called generationexit.com, which is aimed at people who are aged 40 plus, who want to make the jump themselves to becoming location independent. So it's a blog and a podcast. And really, it sort of gives case studies of people who've already made the jump, who have been through that journey that perhaps other people are considering, and, explore some quite difficult issues as well for people. Things like, what do you do if you're waiting for your kids to leave home? What do you do if your kids aren't old enough to leave home? What do you do if you've got caring responsibilities back home. How do you rent your flat out? So on and so forth, as well as the various income streams that you can look at to finance what you're doing, to finance this different way of life, whether that's as a remote worker, a freelancer, or as an entrepreneur. So yeah, that's really what it's focusing on, and it's been really exciting. I've discovered so many people who are 40 and above and who've made that jump, and it's really reassuring for other people to hear that, I think. So that's it in a nutshell.
Wonderful. And I love your website and your podcast. It kind of highlights the different walks of life as an entrepreneur. I know that you showcase different people in different walks from different backgrounds and different countries that are essentially finding freedom and finding what freedom means to them, on their terms, I guess is a key part of that, isn't it? That's the flavor and the richness of this journey, right?
Yeah, and there's a really varied group of people on there, and every single story is different. So, only this week I was doing a podcast with a gentleman who's been traveling since 2003. So he's been on the road for 16 years, and he started off just working abroad, and then he got into niche websites with affiliate links that bring in a semi-passive income stream for him. And, he's been able to sort of really get into his interests, which is around infrastructure in Southeast Asia and developments that are happening. And he's turning that into a profitable business, which is, doing quite well. Another woman was a woman who was a maths professor, and she basically worked as a content developer for various educational publishers, creating videos and textbooks and that sort of thing. And she realized that she could actually do much better by herself. And she was also exploring at the same time these concepts of location independence. So she sold her property, downsized all of her belongings, set up her business, and then moved abroad to Mexico. And now she's saving 70% of her income in order to retire early. She's a really smart woman. And it's just very inspiring to hear of all these different people and how they've done it. And everybody's got some wisdom to part with. And I really enjoy speaking with them.
It's wonderful. And I've listened to that episode that you just talked about there, and it is inspirational hearing that lady's story. People's stories are always so different but so rich, and they're such a great source, aren't they, of allowing you to see possibilities for yourself. I know one of the things that kind of crops up when you think about this idea of location independence, especially when you've been around a little bit in life, as I have, you've got kids, you've got a house, you've got all of the trappings, if you like. It feels like your roots are kind of firmly in the ground, and it would be quite difficult to wrench those roots entirely away and replant somewhere else, or not even have roots at all, I suppose. I guess there's a whole host of issues around that. What are your thoughts on that whole, for the people that are kind of thinking, wow, I couldn't do that. I'm too embedded in, my family, my area, all of those things. Do you get questions like that? Yeah.
I do, actually. In fact, somebody asked me an almost identical question to that on Instagram last week. And it was interesting to hear, because I think that is an issue, particularly for people who are perhaps a little bit older, for want of a better word. And, they absolutely have got mortgages, houses, they've got family and friends, and there's this perception as well that if you're location independent, that it's only 20-year-olds that do that. But it's not true. Actually, the majority of digital nomads are over the age of 38. So it's absolutely the case, though, that people have that kind of quite understandable fear or an automatic perception that perhaps it's not for them. And I always start by thinking, if you have those sorts of dreams, potentially it's a case of just dipping your toe in the water to begin with. So you might trial, for example, just as I did, a sabbatical from work, in which you just go away for 2 or 3 months, somewhere fairly easy and low cost, and you either work remotely or pick up some freelance work that way. Obviously people have got caring responsibilities, and that's not something that you can just walk away from. You can't walk away from your children or your sick parents. So it's a case of really sort of just evaluating what's going on in your life and, making pragmatic decisions that are right for you. And, one woman that I spoke to who was a translator in Italy, her mother was very sick with Alzheimer's. And what she did was, her mother, unfortunately, is at the stage where she can't recognize her daughter anymore. So she will go away for sort of 3 or 4 months of the year. And, at the moment she's in India, and her sister takes over caring responsibilities for that period of time while she's away. And she's a freelance translator, and she can do that anywhere in the world, So I think it's really a question of evaluating what's pragmatic for you and then doing a slowly approach. You don't have to go 365 days per year location independent and sever all of your roots. I don't do that. I'm away for 8 months of the year, and I go back for 4 to see family and friends. I've kept my house and my mortgage, and I filled the house with lodgers. And, that's how I manage it. That's what's right for me. Maybe in a couple of years I might sell the house, but I haven't reached that decision just yet. And I think that's the answer, is just sort of breaking it down into manageable steps, really.
Yeah, I guess, and finding the path that is right for you, because we all have what feel like unique set of circumstances. When we talk to others, it seems like there are so many people in the same boat with very similar circumstances, and so finding what works for you, I guess, is the key.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you don't even need to go abroad. It doesn't have to be a question of going abroad. I know one of my personal friends worked in digital marketing for the lottery, but was really unhappy, and he left and set up as a dog portrait artist. And now he makes quite a lucrative income living off a narrowboat in North London, and he can, take his trade wherever he wants to in the world. So you don't have to go to Bali. There's no rules or regulations about any of this. In fact, if you do have some circumstances which tie you to the country, when you're location independent, you've got more ability to spend time with your parents, albeit you have to work next to them sometimes. But yeah, it's just really sort of thinking in a flexible way about what's right for you.
Yeah, I love that because it is. I mean, I'm in that same boat, right? So I'm technically location independent, but I still live just outside of Liverpool with family and friends and all of that. And for me, the power, the empowerment of this freedom comes from being able to, not be involved in the daily commute and just rock up at a coffee shop and work from wherever I feel like it on the day, right? And it's that feeling that it gives you is so empowering, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I can really relate to that. I mean, I just did too many years of, commuting and sitting in meetings. I was the worst person for meetings. I just was always staring out the window and like a naughty child. And I don't really
pay attention. Look at the board.
Yeah. That was me right up to last year. And I feel as though, just being in charge of your own time and what you do with your own time makes you feel good and makes you feel as though you've got some choices in life, And obviously there is a payoff involved in that. So a trade-off, sorry, not a payoff. So if you've developed this big career within a corporate environment, there's a certain amount of kudos that you get from that as a person. Anybody would, it's a slight sort of attachment to that as an ego stroke, I suppose. Walking away from that does take guts. So, that's the trade-off. You are entering the unknown. You are potentially setting up your own business or, working remotely where you can't have those conversations with colleagues as easily as you could do before. Misunderstandings can arise. And all of those things are quite scary, but you know, you will find a way. Everybody finds a way through them, don't they? I mean, you must feel like that yourself, Colin, because you set up your own business, and it's always an unknown, isn't it? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess you've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Is one of the things that just becomes a natural part of life. But then, Sam, you look at the world of employment, of being employed, and man, I speak to friends that are employed, and I'm glad I'm self-employed. I'm glad I'm an entrepreneur, because the amount of contract, you know, oh, my contract could be coming to an end, I may be being made redundant, I don't know if I'm going to get renewed on my contract, and there's so much uncertainty in employment. For me, I love the freedom of being able to choose when and where and how and what that looks like for me. That to me is outweighs that the uncertainty that you talk about. I'll share something with you. Last week I went to a mastermind in Manchester, in the centre of Manchester. So I live just outside of Liverpool, right in between the two big cities in the north of England, and hopped on the train to Manchester city centre first thing in the morning. And it was like a scene from a film. I felt like I was in a film. There was a sea of grey and black people, just a swathe of people, like walking through the train station, like, you know, almost like robots, you know, this, like, oh, everybody with headphones in, everybody on their phone, just like this sea of people walking through the station. And I was kind of swept up in the tide of that. And it was a thing to behold. Because I'm not involved in the commute and that day-to-day of work. And I kind of thought, wow, it made me appreciate the benefit and the joy of rocking up into my loft. You know, I have a joke with my daughter. I'm like, I'm commuting to work now. You know, I'll see you. I hope there's not heavy traffic. And I literally walk up the stairs and I'm here in my studio. You know, it's but that, holding on to the wonderful and joyous part of that freedom, what that means for you. I think that's the key to this, isn't it? Because it's all about how it makes you feel. It empowers you. It makes you feel like you're on top, like you've got a chance, like you said. And that's so important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting you mentioned about being made redundant, because when I came back from my sabbatical, I actually was made redundant, and I thought it was amazing because I'd already planned to leave. So it saved me, you know, the sort of horror of having to hand my notice in, and, you know, the organization I was working for, they lost their main contract to a competitor. So unfortunately, quite a lot of people are being made redundant right now, and I was one of the first to go. And you know, I've often mused over how, in simply making a decision to chart my life in the way that I want to, steer my life and steer my path, I was able to see that as a really positive thing, not a negative thing. And you know, I felt fully in control of my destiny. Whereas sadly, you know, I feel for some of my ex-colleagues who feel, you know, they're not quite sure what they're going to do next. And so it's been really empowering. I think you're absolutely right about people, you know, having more certainty and security through self-employment. And it's a growing percentage of people who are turning into freelance work, and, you know, entrepreneurship, setting up businesses, etc. It's only supposed to grow more in the future. Alongside remote working, actually, that's also supposed to grow a huge amount as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the whole like remote working thing is quite similar in a sense, isn't it? Because it's just turning the model that we all grew up with about, you know, you go to work, you come home, you go to work, you come home, and this whole model of industry has completely flipped. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is a consultant for a big company in the UK, and he works with some of the top banks and people like that, and we were talking. He works from home. And 10, 15 years ago, he would be in boardrooms with pinstripe suited people and all very serious and businessy. And now his meetings with top level bank execs are all done on a laptop, and there's cats walking across the camera as they're chatting. And, it's just just the way the world of work generally is shifting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's completely right. And apparently 52% of the world's companies overall allow some form of remote working now. And the amount of people who, the amount of remote working that's going on, I think it's gone up to, it's increased by 159% since 2005.
Wow.
It's a huge jump. And I think particularly in some industries, recruitment and retention is a really big issue. And particularly now we've got this global marketplace, people can easily jump jobs. Nobody stays in a job for very much longer than 5 years now. Quite a lot of people really only stick with them for about 2 years. And so offering a flexible working arrangement, whether that's sort of working from home or working from anywhere, is definitely increasing. And I've met a number of people here in Bali who are working for big corporates in that way, including someone working for a Norwegian bank as a data analyst, for example. Right. So it's definitely increasing. I think that sort of working will carry on increasing over time. Yeah.
And so taking back control, wherever that looks like for you, there's some great different examples that aren't necessarily being an entrepreneur running your own thing. You can still be working with and for other people, but have that freedom, and I guess the path of this is finding what's right for you. I loved how you shared that. So one of the questions I have with all of this, Sam, that pops up is the idea of money, right? The money question. So if I like leave my job and set up as an entrepreneur and set up a business idea, something that's been burning inside of me to do, and then, go off around the world, doing the whole digital nomad thing, how do you sustain yourself? That's a huge, huge question mark, isn't it, for a lot of people?
Do you mean in terms of cash flow and savings?
Yeah, cash flow, savings. How do we pay for it? How do I make my commitments back home? How do we kind of manage that whole budget finances thing and making income at the same time, right? There's so many considerations around money, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things I'm trying really hard to do on Generation Exit is advocate quite a responsible approach to some of those issues, because you definitely hear of usually they tend to be slightly younger people who take up this sort of lifestyle, and then unfortunately they have to go home because they've run out of money. And that's no judgment, I'm sure they've gained some value, that's been valuable for them at that particular point in their life. But without doubt, every person that I've spoken to, that I've interviewed, has said the number one thing that you need is some savings. You need some savings to fall back on, however many months that could be, perhaps potentially up to about 9 months worth of living expenses, wherever you're planning to be. And they give reasons such as cash flow. If you are freelancing and you've got some big bills going out, perhaps you've still got your house at home and the mortgage goes out, then, if a client is late in paying you, then you can get really stuck, and that's not ideal. There might also be a medical emergency that you require, having to pay up front as well. So having some savings, I think, is definitely worthwhile. The other thing is that, but I also think that, some people might be put off by that. But I think that, if you're serious about potentially setting up your own business or, working freelance, one way to sort of tackle that is to perhaps take on some clients in your work outside of your normal job, your normal day-to-day job. And then you can build up a bit of a nest egg and at the same time get used to working in that freelance way. And I know a lot of people that have done that. So yeah, it's worth sort of thinking that way. I mean, the other thing as well is that there are things you can do to, mitigate your spending. Not going to the most expensive country. Southeast Asia is really, really cheap. potentially getting lodgers or letting out your property back home. Some people use house sitting arrangements, so they're not really paying for very much at all, in the first year whilst they're getting their business off the ground. And I think sort of, that kind of approach of like hunkering down and getting through the first 6 months to a year, just until you've got your business up and running properly. A lot of nomads take that approach. So they're not borrowing money to set up these businesses. That's not really something that happens. Some of the startups get investment, absolutely, but generally people who are setting off to be location independent don't start in that way. They try to have savings up front and try and keep their costs low in the first year.
Interesting. I like how you mentioned about the idea of a buffer and making provision, I guess, for a period of time to give you that comfort blanket that allows you to find your feet, to find your, to develop income and all of that cool stuff. So if for somebody that is unhappy, one reason or another, whether it's a cataclysmic life event, whether it's just, having a sense of things need to change for me or whatever that looks like, what would be your kind of advice to those folk who are considering a life of location independence? What would be the things that you would say to somebody like in that position, Sam?
I think I'd, encourage them to sort of think seriously about it, whilst also being mindful of their particular needs at that time. So if someone's had a really awful thing happen to them, perhaps a big death in the family or something like that, jumping on a plane to the other side of the world might not be the best thing to do at that particular time for them. It's all down to personal circumstances, isn't it? But it could be something that they can work towards, in 2 years' time, for example, something positive to look forward to give them energy. I remember reading a blog only 3 days ago, actually, by a woman in Bali who I'm trying to get in contact with. And she lost her mother to suicide about 5 years ago and her sister last year to suicide. And
wow.
I know it was really touching tale, and she was writing about how travel had helped her mental health journey, and she was learning to become more resilient and to rely on herself and to fall in love with the world again after a really hard time. And so, absolutely, it's something that people can, approach when they're ready for it. Some things to be mindful of, sometimes it can be quite isolating living this sort of lifestyle. You don't necessarily automatically, rock up to a place and make friends instantly. It takes time. But there's always ways of doing that. There's plenty of Facebook groups in almost every location around Southeast Asia, which are frequented by digital nomads. They're particularly set up to support digital nomads. And in these groups, you will find invites to go out for social events. You'll find networking events. You'll be able to find, bits of work if you're freelancing, or just ask people their opinion on various things. Where is good to eat, for example. And I found those to be really useful. I found those to be fantastically useful. And also, with the technology that we have these days, it's really easy to stay in contact with friends and family back home as well. So, a WhatsApp video call to several friends over the course of the week is something that I always make time for, and my family as well, because it's important for me to preserve those roots. So yeah, I think that, just going back to your question, I think it's absolutely something that can breathe some fresh air into your life and, make you feel in love with the world again. But you just have to do it when it's right for you, basically, and in a way that's right for you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess planning it and doing it as a grown up, shall we say? Although I don't particularly feel like a grown up, I have to say. But planning it and making it making it work for you in a way that is sensible. The idea of having a comfort blanket, a buffer, if that's possible, and doing it in a way that works for your circumstances. That's kind of important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
I mean, I remember there was this another woman that I interviewed. Sorry to keep talking about the interviews, but they are an endless source of inspiration to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
She basically was working as an accountant. Her and her husband were accountants, and they lived in upstate New York, and they had quite a busy life and a commute. And she basically persuaded her husband that what the best thing for them to do, despite them having a child who was about 8, I think, the best thing for them to do to just, you know, remove themselves from this hectic commute and their life and just the trappings of life that were beginning to weigh them down, was to rent an RV and run their accountancy business from the road. She actually turned it into a business presentation, knowing how her husband worked, where she laid out the figures, how much money they would save by giving up their home and, you know, by taking their business on the road, how beneficial it would be for their son. And he agreed. And they spent 2 years going around America. And, you know, they learned along the way how to nurture, not just grow their business. The clients were fine. The clients were quite happy with having remote meetings and that sort of thing. So their business just continued to thrive. For them, what was more of an issue, and they've learned to navigate, is how to develop connections with people when you're on the road the whole time, particularly as they had a son who was, you know, 8 at the time. I think he's 12 now. And at first they'd sort of just go to these, you know, holiday parks full of RVs and expect to just mingle with other families. And of course that didn't work, because those families were on holiday and they were just wanting to hang out together. They didn't particularly want to necessarily always gel with this unusual family who were homeschooling their son in this vehicle. So then they discovered particular homeschooling parents who only live in RVs in America. There's a whole Facebook group of them, and they got involved with them, and they'd meet up with them in various different campsites over America. And then they decided to forget the RV, and they sent it back to the hire company, and they came to Europe. And they've been around Europe for the last 2 years, and again, still connecting, usually spending 1 month or 2 months in a country, really getting to know it, and then connecting through Facebook groups with other schooled families, basically, other parents who are homeschooling their families. And I just thought that they were very resourceful and ingenious about what they did to meet their particular needs. And their son is going to grow up having known, you know, so much of the world. Their future plans involve going back so that he can settle in one place and, you know, form enduring relationships as a teenager, which is, you know, you can imagine that why they might do that. But I thought they were really inspiring, and yeah, it was great to hear their story. Another thing that made me reflect on is that almost everybody I know who's doing this over the long term, they don't rush through countries. They tend to spend quite a long time in each country. So like slow traveling, really, in order to, you know, be able to work and be able to live a life at the same time. The people who are traveling do that anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess you don't realize when you're on holiday, you're just on holiday, aren't you? And the whole day, 24/7 is the holiday thing. Whereas if you're working, probably, I don't know, depending on your schedule, a third or a quarter of that day is work, isn't it? When you effectively, you could be anywhere because you're just in the zone of work. So I guess that affects how you approach being in a different environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Because every time you move, it takes a huge amount of mental energy to understand, you know, where you're going to sleep, whether the internet connection is reliable or not, where the local shops are, where the restaurants are, to get your bearings, to understand how you're going to exercise, you know, where are cool places to socialize. All of those things take huge amounts of energy, generally about 3 weeks per location that you go to. So if you keep moving really quickly, you'll end up sort of, I feel anyway, I mean, there are people who do this, but perhaps live more of a transient lifestyle, which might not be good for you over a length of time. I think it's nice to develop connections with people. You know, everything is more lovely when you share it with somebody, and I think, yeah, if you're able to do that, then you'll develop lifelong connections, and you might meet up with them again at some point in future. So that's certainly what I'm beginning to do. Yeah.
And I love the examples that you've shared, how regardless of circumstance, and there's been many different types of circumstance, there's the common thing about this is creating and making those new connections with new people, and, you know, knowing that you're not on your own, having support, the Facebook groups, the communities. I guess that sense of not being alone is quite critical when you're in a completely strange, you know, new environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's actually really important for your well-being. You know, we are social creatures. We need to be in contact with people, and to feel that people are on our side. And by and large, most people are. You know, what it's taught me is that across the world, most people are generally good, and they want to support each other, whether that's within the digital nomad community or within the Balinese community. You know, the Balinese people are so wonderful, really friendly, kind people. And I know that if anything happened to me, they, you know, I'm fairly certain that a Balinese person would want to help. And as I think, you know, it can be really refreshing to see the world through those eyes. It's very positive. But you do need to make steps to allow that to happen. So it does involve putting yourself out there a little bit, or, you know, connecting with people online, or, you know, just kind of reaching out really and saying, hello, anybody here want to meet up for a dinner one night? I've done that a few times, and it's left me having nice connections with people that I still see. So yeah, it's definitely worthwhile doing that, I think.
Wonderful. And so what's next in store for you, Sam? What's your kind of plan for Generation Exit and traveling? Are you sticking around in Bali? What does that look like?
Well, originally I had this rather ambitious plan to go around Southeast Asia, but I've changed my mind about that. And I think what I'm going to do is do 2 or 3 countries a year, more slowly, and really get to know, you know, the countries and also the nomad communities within the countries, because I'm interested in networking with people like that in order to, you know, run the podcast and write the blog. So my plan for the immediate future from a traveling perspective is that I'll be leaving Bali on the 6th of December. My visa runs out then. So yeah, just to clarify on the visa front, because of the fact that I'm working online, my clients are all abroad and my business is based in the UK, I am basically here on tourist visas, and that's how a lot of digital nomads work, in case people were wondering. But yeah, so I will be leaving Bali on the 6th of December, and I'll be going to Thailand, and I am staying on an island called Koh Lanta, which is on the west of Thailand, just north of Krabi. And I'm staying there over Christmas and New Year, and I'm in a co-living and co-working arrangement. So basically, I'm going to be surrounded by digital nomads 24/7 for a whole month. All of us will be away from our families, and in the same boat. It's like a high for digital nomads.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, exactly. Quite interesting. You know, entrepreneurial sorts, and we'll all be hanging out for Christmas and New Year together. And then I'm going from there up to Chiang Mai, which is in the north of Thailand, and again is also is well known for having quite an active startup scene and an active nomad scene. So I'm going up there. I've got some contacts up there, and so I'll probably stay there about 2 months. And then I might have a little trip through Laos, just get to know that. I've got some desires to get on the back of a motorbike and explore it a bit. And then I'm going to come back to Bali. So yeah, that's kind of, I'm just doing Thailand, Bali and Laos this year, and I'm meeting my family in Canada in June, and then I'm back to the UK. And next year, I don't know where I'm going just yet.
That's the joy of it,
yeah,
isn't it? The joy of the freedom
exactly.
that it brings. Yeah,
yeah, maybe Vietnam and the Philippines, or might be India. Not really sure at the moment. So I'll figure that out later.
Wonderful. And the world quite literally is your oyster, as they say. Hey, you can,
yeah,
and decide where the mood takes you. Wonderful.
Absolutely. And just in terms of Generation Exit, really my plan is just to build a community of people who are, working in this way, and to provide resources for people who are over the age of 40 and thinking about making this jump, because that's the reason I set it up. There wasn't very much on the internet aimed at my age group in particular. So that's why I decided to set it up. And I've had a lot of really positive feedback from people, which is great. It's obviously something that's needed. And so, yeah, it's just to grow that community and keep being of service, basically.
Excellent. I love it. And so how would people find, I've put the website address up as a banner on our chat there, but how do people kind of find out more? What do they do? How do they go about that?
They can just, hop onto that website, and there's a little invitation on the homepage for them to sign up to a free email course. So in that course, you will basically receive 5 emails over a number of days, and it's really a sort of crash introduction course into what you need to think about if you want to become location independent and you're over 40, all the various things that you need to think about, including assessing your own sort of, I suppose, barriers to potentially going location independent, whether that's family or mortgage or, anything like that. It's a very pragmatic, information rich course. There's no studying involved. All you've got to do is read it. So yeah, just people could pop their email address in there and they receive that. Then, there's just always stuff going up on the blog twice per week, and the podcast at the moment is coming out every other week. But if it carries on the way it's going, then I'm going to turn that to weekly format. So there's lots there for people to see, and it's all free.
Wonderful. So be sure to check out the blog and the podcast, and find your freedom wherever that looks like for you. Sam, it's been a wonderful chatting with you today. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and the truly inspiring stories of your journey and the people that you've been interviewing for the podcast and blog. It's wonderful to hear. It energizes me and gives me like hope and inspiration. So thank you so much for sharing.
Great. It's been lovely speaking with you, Colin.
Thank you, Sam. So, guys, we're going to end the broadcast there. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I hope and wish you every success in finding what that freedom looks like for you on your journey, and every success. We'll be back with another live segment in just a few moments, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you, guys.